Welcome to this session on the principles of instruction. While all of the key features of an equitable multi-level system of supports impact each other, this session will most closely connect to the key features of high-quality instruction. As you review this session, there will be some opportunities for you to pause and reflect or practice the concepts being reviewed. Academic, behavioral, and social skills are the content areas we will be focusing on today. When teaching, we need to teach all academic, behavioral, and social skills to fluency to make sure that learners can function independently. We usually don't think about teaching behaviors or social skills to fluency, but it is important to remember that anything we want students to do is going to follow a skill development model, which is shown here. Starting from the colored boxes working left to right, we teach a skill or strategy. And our first evidence that learning is happening is that they become accurate. Sometimes what we see in our students is something like slow and accurate. Errors are typical in this phase. Many times, student behavioral errors associated with this phase can be misinterpreted as choosing to do the wrong thing, when in fact, the student is still in a stage of learning where errors are common. The amount of practice and repetitions a student has will determine how quickly they become fluent or automatic. So it is important to provide frequent opportunities for practice. So we continue to provide lots of opportunities to practice the skill or strategy, and the evidence that students are fluent is that they can perform the skill automatically without hesitation. Once students are fluent, it is important to continue to bring the skills or behaviors into regular opportunities for use, which is how the skills are maintained over time. This step must not be overlooked because if the skill is not frequent enough, or if use of the skill is not periodically acknowledged, errors will start to show up. So, educators need to think about how the needed skills show up in daily routines or as academic behaviors so that they can be prompted and reinforced. Finally, over time, the learner will be able to generalize this learning to other situations and even make adaptations as needed. Today, we will be showing you how to use this skill development model as well as an instructional cycle coming up next to plan, create, and deliver high-quality instruction for social and academic behaviors. Just like teaching academics, we teach behaviors. The instructional cycle includes these 5 phases: define, model, practice, monitor and acknowledge, and adjust. We will be breaking down each of these phases by going over the purpose, what it is, and how to do it. The first thing you need to do when planning for academic and social behavioral instruction is to define what it is that you want all students to know and be able to do. Regardless of if it is a behavioral, social, or academic skill, teacher clarity is a powerful factor in classroom instruction, and it has a significant impact on learning. In the book, Visible Learning for Literacy, Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie note that the effect size for teacher clarity is 0.75. When you develop your school-wide and classroom behavioral matrices, you create expectations and behavioral indicators that describe what you want students to know and be able to do in specific settings, locations, situations, or routines. Likewise, when you develop academic learning targets, you are providing critical information for students so that they know and understand the expectations and how to meet them. This helps to create common understanding for staff, students, and families so that they are clear on what is to be learned, what the performance criteria is, and also so that there is consistent messaging. The academic and behavioral performance indicators need to be further broken down into explicit descriptions of skills, behaviors, or strategies. The descriptions should be written in observable and measurable terms, and there need to be specific details and performance criteria established. You could say that the descriptions help others know what it looks like and sounds like when done correctly. Finally, Student prior knowledge and experiences need to be evident in the descriptions so that they have a point of reference to connect to, thereby making it easier for them to have clarity. How you go about doing this is by using your anchor charts, matrix, and other established competencies to identify what to teach. You will establish the why for students. In other words, help them understand why these behaviors, academic skills, and competencies are important and necessary in this particular setting, at this particular time, and how they connect to the bigger picture of your school-wide system and students' prior knowledge. It may be helpful for you to think about how you write student learning targets. The descriptions will be clear and concise and use student-friendly language. Teachers use the evidence-based instructional strategy of modeling or demonstrating in academics, physical education, and the arts because it is good instructional practice. We know that when modeling is done effectively, students will understand the importance of the skill or behavior being taught and will be able to execute the skill more accurately. When students have a more accurate skill execution, they will develop more confidence as learners. Modeling is part of the gradual release of responsibility instructional framework, which is also referred to as the I do, we do, you do format. Modeling is the I do portion of the gradual release and provides learners with a picture of what to do and what a successful outcome will look like. This is very important because it can help students learn faster in addition to performing with fewer errors. Teaching academic, behavioral, or social skills with modeling is fairly straightforward. You will deliver a focused lesson using a lesson plan, demonstrations of what to do using visuals and examples while thinking aloud are all necessary components of good modeling technique. Using keywords or phrases while thinking aloud serve as cues or prompts, which support students in remembering how to do something correctly. These prompts or cues will be used later during guided and independent practice in the gradual release of responsibility instructional framework. The use of modeling is important because it provides cognitive support for students. In fact, a journal article in the American Educator, Spring 2012, states that modeling helps to reduce the cognitive load of working memory. In other words, it frees up brain space to take in what they need to do. As I shared in the skill development model earlier, practice builds fluency and fosters skill maintenance and the ability to adapt the use of the skill in novel situations. Practice is an important part of learning because it helps move newly learned information or skills into long-term memory storage, which frees up working memory and allows the student to retrieve the needed skill or behavior easily because it has become automatic or like second nature. The use of practice in instruction is an evidence-based strategy and is referred to as the we do and you do phases of the gradual release of responsibility instructional framework. The Wisconsin DPI supports the use of the gradual release of responsibility and states that the goal of the gradual release of responsibility framework is to provide appropriate instruction moving students toward independence. Lesson plans and anchor charts are tools that will help you be very intentional with the use of this practice. Be creative and think about and observe how a typical day or scenario plays out and look for ways to embed the practice of the skills and behaviors that you identified as important for students to know and be able to do. Environmental and situational cues are vital to memory storage, which is why it is so important to provide instruction and practice in the setting or context where you want the behavior or skill to show up. This is especially important for students who may have known learning differences. It is important for them to be able to show what they know in the setting where learning has happened, so they have access to the environmental and situational cues that trigger stored memories. I bring this up because many times we believe we are helping students out when taking assessments by giving them a place and time away from the classroom where they learned, when in fact, we are removing learning aids that the students who remain in the natural learning setting are benefiting from. Let's take a closer look at the gradual release of responsibility and how you can use it to intentionally move through the phases of modeling and practice. This graphic represents the shift in cognitive load when students are learning. The teacher starts out with the majority of the work, and as they foster student growth in their skill development, the cognitive load shifts to the students as they move toward independence. So what does this look like? Notice that the teacher starts out with a focus lesson and modeling and then shifts to the behaviors of guiding, coaching, and affirming. Students start out watching and then move through imitating the teacher to peer practice and finally to independent practice. Notice that even when students are doing it alone, the teacher is still affirming the use of the skill. This helps with skill maintenance and adaptation later on. It is important to create and use a lesson plan template that will provide a structure for the gradual release of responsibility. In short, the practice will look something like this. The teacher delivers a focus lesson while modeling. Students follow along, imitating the teacher with teacher prompts, which are environmental, situational, and verbal. Next, the students act it out together in partners while prompting each other using the same environmental, situational, and verbal prompts. Finally, students use the skill independently while using environmental and situation self-prompts. Pause here. Let's do some independent practicing using the Think and Write strategy. This will help you consolidate your learning. Answer these questions. Where do you see evidence of the gradual release of responsibility in your school and classroom settings? Welcome back. The next phase in the instructional cycle is monitor and acknowledge. Let's deal with monitor first. Monitoring for learning helps educators determine if students are responding positively to instruction. Bottom line is that monitoring makes us better teachers. Determining where students are on the skill development continuum will help you enhance supports for all students as well as to identify students who require additional supports. The areas to monitor are safety, health, social, emotional, behavioral, and academic. In order to accurately determine where students are at in their learning, you will need to look back at your defined learning outcomes from the Define Simply phase. Formative assessments and the use of data to establish clear indicators for typical timeframes for students to move from accuracy to fluency will be needed. Here are some examples of how you can monitor student performance using formative assessment measures. Bell ringers are standard routines that students follow as they come into class. While students are engaging in class entry routines, teachers are looking to see if students can perform them independently, or if additional prompts or instruction are needed. Asking questions that are tied to environmental or situational cues are another strategy to monitor the level of skill acquisition. Students can respond using words, response cards, or physical actions. A behavioral example of this is, we are getting ready to go to the LMC. What do you need to do to get ready? Tell me or show me. Use of student self-ratings is another great monitoring strategy that also helps students become more self-aware. Here are a few ideas. Ask students to check yourself for specific skills or behaviors. Ask students to take note of what they are doing individually or as a group, and then have them give a thumbs up, sideways, or down, or some numerical value on a scale, or rate themselves on a Post-it note or exit ticket that they turn in. Having established indicators for student learning progression is critical in identifying students who require additional support. Using a data point such as 80% of students exhibiting minimal errors will help you gauge what is typical. Also, a decrease in the need to prompt students is another indicator that students are at or are approaching automaticity. When student learning appears to be outside of the typical range, it may be helpful to invite a trusted colleague to do a peer observation to gather normative data for the whole class. This can be accomplished by using some kind of systematic observation or to have them take notes that inform student response to specific instructional moves. Monitoring and acknowledging go hand in hand. It is really hard to use monitoring techniques without giving students feedback. Specific positive feedback is an evidence-based classroom management practice that can improve students' social, academic, and behavioral performance by providing specific acknowledgement of what you see happening. Sometimes we call this praise or compliments or acknowledgements, but whatever you decide to call it, when it's done correctly, it is a very effective way to improve students' skills as well as creating positive school and classroom culture. The formula for specific positive feedback is simple. Use the student's name followed by what the student did and then adding the result of their efforts. Here is an example. Yuli, I noticed that you organized your lesson materials for today. That really helped you be an active member of your group. So now it is time to pause here and practice. Using an academic, social, or behavioral skill that you want students to use automatically, write a specific feedback statement that you can use immediately in your practice. We are moving into the adjust phase of the instructional cycle. I wanted to share this quote with you because reflection is an important part of making instructional adjustments. John Dewey said, "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience." This is good food for thought. Building in time for reflecting on practice is what makes us better at creating positive environments for our students to learn. The use of reflective teaching has benefits for teachers and students. Teachers use reflection to adapt instructional methods and to become more effective in improving student outcomes. Ongoing formative assessments from monitoring student learning are used to adjust instruction. Reflective teacher practice can consist of conducting self-assessments, problem solving and using analytical skills, and considering improvements that will benefit students. Once a change in practice has been implemented, study of the changes are needed to determine if the change in practice is having the desired effect. If your goal is for an equitable multi-level systems of supports to be implemented with fidelity, being a reflective practitioner is critical. An equitable multi-level system of supports is about changing adult systems and behaviors so students can succeed. Here are some reflective questions that keep the focus on what the students need, which will encourage the adults to change based on what is working and what is not working. Take a moment to read through these reflective questions and make note of anything you would like to keep on your radar for future use in your practice. Let's take a moment to summarize what we have covered in this section. This graphic represents the skill development model on the top row and the teacher implemented instructional cycle on the bottom row. Remember that learning is not a linear process. So the green dual-sided arrow in the center represents movement back and forth along the learning continuum. The example at the bottom refers to the use of this information. Simply put, if fewer than 80% of our students are reaching the desired outcomes, we need to return to instructional practices that strengthen learning. Now it is time to reflect on the principles of instruction. So, on a piece of paper, or if you're joining one of our other sessions, in your workbook, let's do a 3-2-1 reflection. Write down 3 things you strongly connected to, 2 things you want to use in your own practice, and 1 thing you want to dig into more deeply. And that's it. Thank you for attending this session, and we hope to see you soon in networking.